This is the Gen Y Leaders Podcast. Welcome to the Gen Y Leaders Podcast, where we guide millennials to become the next generation of business leaders and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Eric Huey, and multiple times a month we bring you interviews from high-performing millennials who are challenging perceptions and changing expectations of our generation. Our mission is to help you overcome fear, take action, and go confidently in the direction of your dreams. It's time to start preparing now, mainly because 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day, which will create a vacuum of career opportunities that you've been waiting for. Will you be ready? On this episode, we interview Vineet Prasad, founder of Savings Academy, a one-to-one personal finance coaching program for young professionals. Vineet is a former employee at Facebook, but left the corporate tech world behind to help others with their savings. He coaches others from personal experience, having saved 60% of his own annual salary while working at Facebook in order to have enough financial base to launch Savings Academy. He's a firm believer that you should go to work because you want to, not because you have to. This is a great episode for anyone struggling to find balance between their full-time job and their side gig. Here's my interview with Vineet Prasad. Mr. Vineet Prasad, thanks so much for joining us on the Gen Y Leaders Podcast. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Your background at Facebook, I think, is key as well. I've been looking for someone with some of that big tech background experience, Facebook, Google, Amazon. So really fortunate and blessed to be able to track you down.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on the show today. So looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, it'll be fun. A lot of key takeaways from this I'm sure viewers will have. But yeah, just to start off, if you could, just explain who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Vineet Prasad. I'm an entrepreneur. I run a business called Savings Academy, which helps millennial professionals and entrepreneurs succeed financially so they can spend more time on the people and things that they love.
It sounds like you've given that pitch before, maybe.
Once or twice.
Just a few times. So why Savings Academy? Why did you decide to do this more than anything else? What keeps you motivated?
Sure. So for me, I think, when I look back in my career, I've had phases, and I think everybody's had phases where you're in a job that isn't exactly right for you, that, you eventually want to go somewhere else. But a lot of people are in those kind of jobs and they feel trapped. Like they feel like they can't go anywhere else. And for me, personal finance is one of the ways you can really unlock a lot of other doors, open up a lot of doors. If you're not worried about the next paycheck coming in fact, if you really developed good savings, you really can give yourself a lot more freedom. And yeah. I think freedom is the ultimate currency, and time is the ultimate currency. So that's sort of the why for me. Like I always say, succeeding in personal finance is great, but why? The why for me is so that you, at the end of the day, you can spend more time on the people and things you love. And that includes building a career that is in line with, your passion, whether that's in the workforce or as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate your insights. I want to dive more into that and what led you to be, so passionate about personal finance and what led you to Savings Academy. But first, I really want to touch on your time at Facebook. I know that's a big point of interest for viewers or listeners, just because out here, at least in the Midwest, people listen from here. There's no real big tech companies. I mean, we have the Cerners and Sprint, different companies like that. But if you could, just elaborate on your experience at Facebook for us. What was that like?
Sure. So let's see. I was about 3 years into my career when I joined Facebook. I was blown away at the beginning. Like, it's definitely, all the Silicon Valley stereotypes about what these tech companies are like, they're true. You get the free food, you get the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But one of the biggest things is, for me at least, I had been working with really smart people throughout my career, and I had gone to college with really smart people, but I was just blown away by a lot of the, um, coworkers that I had. I came in feeling like the stupidest person in the room, so to speak, like in every meeting, and
Yeah.
in every, like, because I was like, these people are so smart, and like, how did I even get in here? And there is even a term for that at like Facebook and Google called imposter syndrome, because most people go through it. But working at these companies, like working at Facebook, was one of the best experiences of my career, and I loved it. For a corporation, moves very, very fast
Yeah.
relative to most large corporations. I think that's embedded in the culture. Um, I think, it is pretty progressive and sort of, liberal in values. A lot, like I said, a lot of smart people, very open culture. You can learn about what's going on in the rest of the company pretty easily. I love the culture of Facebook. I think if I had ended up staying in the corporate world, I think that would have been a company that I would have loved to, stay with long term. But entrepreneurship ended up being what my true love. So
Entrepreneur
yeah.
bug bit you, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. We appreciate the insights. I've always seen Mark Zuckerberg in interviews say that if you're not moving fast enough and break something, then you're doing it wrong, or
Hmm.
something to that effect.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
in fact, one of Facebook's core values is to move fast. And I
yeah,
think relative to most corporations, Facebook and other tech companies are willing to try things, and see, what works, rather than spending years developing something and then, oh, actually nobody likes it. So it's software, right? You can iterate faster than you can on, say, making a car, right? You can't
right.
just be like, let's try making a car like this and see what people think. Like software, you can launch something pretty quickly, see if there's a good fit between what the customers are looking for and what you've built, and then iterate. So iterations, I think, really key. And then in terms of like the social fun, stuff, it is like, I wouldn't say all the stereotypes are true, but if you ever watch the TV show Silicon Valley, which is, a somewhat popular TV show on HBO,
Yeah, it's
they
great.
they get they get some of the stuff. They get some of the stuff right, for sure.
I'm sure. Yeah, it's always incredible the writers they have and all the intel and insights they have to be able to closely mimic real life.
Yeah, exactly.
You touched on something a moment ago in regards to imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think more and more people have heard that term being thrown around. So if you could maybe elaborate on that and kind of explain to the viewers what that means.
Sure. So imposter syndrome is, something I heard like my first week at Facebook, and probably came up every week when I was at Facebook.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same is true at Google as well. My sister's over at Google, and I now live in Mountain View, California, which is Google's headquarters, and it's like 20 minutes from Apple, Facebook, Google. Like, it's definitely Silicon Valley. I think this is a prevalent term throughout Silicon Valley, and probably in other industries as well. But the idea being that when you walk into, any organization that's filled with smart or capable people, you might come in feeling like, wait, I'm not supposed to be here. Like, all these other people are way smarter than me, way more capable than me, and like, this was a mistake, or I got lucky. And you start doubting yourself, and that's actually very bad for productivity and mental health, right?
Oh
Because
yeah.
you're, at the end of the day, at a company where you're supposed to be, creative and, kind of, more driven by, what is possible, and your expertise, than by fear. That can be really crippling to your productivity and your longevity at the company, and just well-being. So people talk about it and bring it up, and share that they felt the same way. And I think usually you have some form of it the whole time you're at
Right.
one of those companies. I
Yeah.
did, for sure. um, but
What's the underlying fear that you're going to get figured out and someone's going to pass you up for your job, or that you're going to mess something up?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good clarification. Yeah, I mean, exactly right. So I joined Facebook in the data analytics department. I was doing some data analytics stuff, and a lot of my coworkers were like PhDs in computer science, PhDs in statistics, or um, engineering, and I was just like, these people are so smart. Like, they're so good at like data science and predictive modeling. Like, how was I supposed to be here? And I was like, if anybody ever realizes how little I know compared to them, like they would fire me, right? That's the fear. It's like you like someone's gonna figure it out, and then like I get fired or something. And the reality is, everybody's there. You know, they have very rigorous processes for how they choose people. Everyone's there for a reason. For me, and in fact, later on, you know, I realized that I had a relative strength in some other areas. Like, for example, once we do an analysis, you know, persuading, say, the leadership or the management to, hey, like, here's what we found. We need to actually change our processes or change what we're doing based on these findings, you know, whereas some of the folks are really good at doing all the data analysis, but not as good as the persuasion and sort of the, like, you know, hey, how do we, you know, communicate this? So, you know, every team has, you know, every team in every sort of element has people that are good at one thing or another. And I think, you know, people, human nature is to look at the ways that they're weaker compared to other people and be like, oh gosh, like I suck, you know, compared to everyone else. But so that's kind of imposter syndrome.
Yeah, appreciate the explanation. You literally took the words right out of my mouth. I was thinking that was just kind of human nature for people to feel that. I mean, I think any company, no matter the size, people are bound to feel that. So it's kind of refreshing in a way to know that goes on at the huge mega corporations that are, you know, the end all be all of employment opportunities. Again, definitely, I think a human nature thing. So I'm glad you touched on it and could help us label it, so to speak.
Sure.
But you started segueing into it there as far as building confidence. And I think from one of our earlier conversations, you had touched on your passion for personal finance and how when you got in the door at Facebook, people were kind of asking you how you were budgeting correctly because you had a little more financial freedom than they had. So get us started on that topic as far as kind of how you transitioned out of Facebook and what led you to start Savings Academy, or I guess more so, you know, start helping people with their personal finance.
Sure. So when I, you know, was sort of a couple years out of school, I realized that I had a lot of this fear, even before joining Facebook, around like, what would happen if I got fired, right? Like what would happen? And I got really into personal finance for that reason. Is like, I don't like operating from fear, right? It's not good, like from a health perspective, it's not good from just being a good employee. Like if you're afraid, if you're like, oh, I don't want to make a mistake, as opposed to like, hey, you know what? I'm confident in what I'm doing, and like, I'm going to go forward and, you know, do what I think is best here. And so personal finance was one of those big areas for me to like reduce that fear of like, hey, you know, if I'm living paycheck to paycheck, where literally if I lost my job, like I wouldn't be able to pay the bills next month, which is how a lot of Americans, you know, unfortunately live today, with that fear. You know, I started saving a significant percent of my income, and I started developing, you know, over time, you know, systems and processes, me individually, and then eventually with my wife, systems and processes to really get good at saving and planning for the future, and you know, doing it in a way that I think a lot of people think of like, oh, to be good at budgeting, you just have to be like really disciplined and, you know, cut everything, right? Like stop spending on everything. And that's like the traditional advice, and that advice sucks. It doesn't actually work for anyone.
Right.
But being really strategic about it, and being aware and putting in systems and planning ahead. It took me a while to get good at, but eventually I started getting really good at it. I started realizing, wow, it's really exciting to build up, you know, that emergency fund and then beyond, and then eventually get to the point where you have passive income, and then you have income just coming in every month, and that income's growing, and you're like, geez, like this is awesome. And it just opens up so many doors and so much freedom. So even when I joined Facebook, I had just signed like a 12-month lease for an apartment in Mountain View, which is not a cheap place to live. So even at the beginning, I was, you know, a bit more afraid, but throughout Facebook, you know, and by the time I left Facebook, I was saving 60% of what came in.
That's incredible.
You know, as a page. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that really, that level of savings, and this is not like, this took me a long time to get to, and you know, I was making a good income there. So that's not, it's not saying, hey, everybody should be saving 60% of their paycheck, but everybody should be saving or paying towards debt. I will say that no matter income. So I think that sort of saving and building up the financial runway that you kind of labeled earlier is what then later allowed me to look up and say, okay, what would I do if I didn't have to think about money? Like, what would I do if I wasn't afraid at all? And I realized that like the journey I had gone through in really building up my savings to the point where it could provide me this runway was something that I really love to do. And it happened organically. Like you said, there are people at Facebook and other friends that were like, hey man, like I started talking about this stuff. I'm really passionate about personal finance and budgeting and cash flow. And people were like, hey, let's talk about this after work. And so I'd chat or during lunch, and eventually one person said, hey, can we talk about this every couple weeks so that you can keep me on track with the budgeting and like, give me advice when I slip or when I'm not sure what to do. It's like, sure. And so that person I eventually helped go from being paycheck to paycheck to really saving eventually 25% of his paycheck. Wow. And really building up that emergency fund. And that was one of the most rewarding professional things I'd ever done in my entire life. And I was this is awesome. And so I started doing it for free with more people, just one-on-one kind of financial coaching. And then eventually, somebody's like, you should do this professionally because this is awesome. You should, charge for this. And so I charged at the beginning like $10 a month, very, very little. Yeah. And that actually helped, charging a little bit, because then people would actually show up to the financial coaching.
Keeps them accountable.
Exactly right. And then from there, this was all while I was at Facebook. I started this as a side hustle. Yeah. And then from there, I started to see the results that people were having. And like people were going from like saving nothing every month to saving hundreds of dollars every month that they either put towards credit card debt or student loans, or, if they'd paid off their high interest debt, then it was going into an emergency fund. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, and I'm really helping to change people's life trajectory, which was amazing. So I would do it. Like I'd wake up early in the morning, work on my business, and then I'd have client calls in the evenings and on weekends. I would be doing my Facebook job, but I was like, my heart, like I had this great job at Facebook. I was good at my job. I'd finally figured things out, but I was like, my heart is in this thing. I really love, helping people succeed financially. And so, I'm very lucky. I have a very supportive partner, my wife, and she, I said, hey, I'd love to give this a shot, like full time. Eventually I got to the point where I kind of capped out on how many clients I could take. I raised pricing, and then I kind of eventually capped out on what I could do while I was at Facebook. And she, was like, hey, let's do it. We have the savings. I had a significant runway. She was working as well, so that also definitely took the pressure off. But I made the leap in February 1st, 2019. So that's 9 months ago. And I've been doing it since.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congrats on 9 months. That's super exciting.
Thank you.
And also kudos to you for kind of being your own first case study or proof of concept, because I think exactly what you're teaching others to do is, what you've done, what you just mentioned as far as building that financial runway for your health, so you could launch, Savings Academy. And I'm sure we kind of skimmed over this a bit, but I want to revisit it for listeners. They're probably asking themselves, saying out loud, how in the heck did Vineet save 60% of his income? And then how did he get his first mentee or person he was training to save 25% of their income? I mean, I know it's probably a very different situations for, everyone that you coach or teach. But can you give us like, I don't know, maybe 1 to 3 practical tips or kind of like overall advice as far as how you were able to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one I think is awareness. I think most people fall like even in that step, just knowing what you're spending. This is true with all, goals in life. Like if you're not even aware of it, you're going to fail. It's like have you ever tried driving without a speedometer? Like you're going to speed, right? So like having an awareness system, but a system that really works well for you and one that you're checking in on regularly is a huge piece of it, a huge percentage of it. Like, it could be something like mint.com or Mint, the app is, the most common ones, but there's other really great ones out there. Just sort of that you can easily keep track of what you're doing. And you need to be revisiting that, I think, at least once a week, checking in on it, categorizing your transactions and such so that you actually have a picture of what you're doing. Number 2, I think, is mindset. A a lot of people have like I said earlier, a belief that I'm either good or I'm bad at personal finance. And if I'm struggling at it, I just suck at money, right? I just suck at money. And that's just fact. And I've tried in the past, whenever I try to save, it just doesn't work out. And they also believe I'm just not disciplined enough. It's about discipline. And let me tell you this, your problem is not discipline. Your problem is not that you're bad at money. Nobody is inherently good or bad at money. Nobody is, inherently just so disciplined that they're good at this or so undisciplined they can't do it. I think it's all about the strategies and systems that you put into place. And some people were really fortunate to see good examples growing up or in a role model or, a close friend or something like that. Hey, you saw somebody who had really good strategies and systems around how they manage their money. And some people didn't. Some people grew up around having really bad examples around money, and they don't teach this stuff in school, right? They don't teach stuff in high school. They don't teach stuff in college. So if you really think that the reason that you struggle with money is because of discipline and, that you're bad with money inherently, I just have to say you're wrong. It's about getting the right strategies and systems in place.
Yeah. Appreciate that. Thanks for your insight.
Mm-hmm.
One point we talked about in an earlier conversation when we were before this call was the concept of go to work because you want to, not because you have to. And I thought that was such a key point. And as you may know, I do these drop cards, these quote cards to promote interviews on social media. So I think I'm already picking that as one to
Great.
Years. But if you could just elaborate on that a little bit and what that means to you.
Absolutely. So I'm big on the term financial freedom and financial independence. And I think what that means is when you get to the point where like you have a significant amount of savings and you have a significant amount of passive income, eventually you can get to the point where you're working, you could easily survive off your savings for a significant period of time. Or even eventually when your passive income can pay for your expenses, well, then you really, you don't need to be working, but you would still work, I would argue. And I will still work, even once I reach the point where my passive income can pay for my expenses, because we as human beings like need to be challenged. We need to be contributing in some way to society. But how much better of an employee would you be? How much better of an entrepreneur would you be if you weren't showing up every day because you needed to? You're showing up every day because you wanted to. And you're just like, you know what? I'm not here for the paycheck. I'm here because I want to get like X, Y, and Z done. Like how much less fear would you have, right? How much more willing would you be willing to say like, hey, you know what? These are the three things that I'm being asked to do or that I need to do. Actually, number one is the most important. Number three is not that important. You do it, of course, kindly, respectfully, and in a way that is, but you'd be way more effective. And I've seen this at Facebook. Like some of the most effective people who consistently get great performance ratings, get promoted early, a lot of them are like, they don't work that many, huge amount of hours per week. A lot of them are, in a pretty secure place financially, and they're just willing to say like, hey, these are the most important things for me to work on. They have very little fear, and they're just able to be creative and confident because of it.
Yeah, that helps combat the imposter syndrome that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And I truly believe the world would be a better place if less people were operating in their jobs and in their lives out of fear, and more so operating from out of confidence. And I think, paying off that debt and, really building up those savings really helps you. It's one of many things that can help you decrease fear and increase confidence, but it's one of the big ones.
Yeah, without a doubt. That's almost like the perfect soundbite to end the interview on. So we'll see you. No, I'm just kidding. You mentioned passive income a couple times throughout the interview.
Yeah.
So that's catching people's ears
Sure.
or eyes if they're watching. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit and maybe just briefly touch on what passive income is for people who don't know, and then maybe how you're building that. Are you investing in stocks and bonds? Are you doing real estate? What's your strategy there?
Sure. So let me give a quick caveat, which is I'm not a financial advisor, so I can just share what I do. I work with folks all around like cash flow, budgeting, but I don't, give folks advice around investing. So if someone has debt, I can help them, pay it off, get the strategies and systems and mindset and behaviors in place to do that. Same thing with building up savings for an emergency fund, a down payment, but I don't help people invest. Financial advisors do that. But that being said, I can share what I do personally. So, with passive income, I think, typically two of the biggest ways to get it are, you can do it entrepreneurially, by creating a course or something that sends off money. But even that, I wouldn't consider that totally passive. The two biggest sources of passive income, three biggest sources, I suppose, are stocks, bonds, and real estate, for the most part, from my perspective. And just interest on a bank account or something. But I'd couple that up with bonds. So stocks, buying a proportion of a company and, a piece of a company, and then that appreciates over time. You get dividends as well, and that's passive income. Bonds, you just get paid, interest on the bonds every quarter, every month. And then real estate, of course, you get, you get rent, and you might get appreciation as well. And you get a nice tax write-off as well if you're doing rental real estate. Now, there are, you've probably heard the term like mutual funds and index funds. So generally speaking, a lot of the advice out there is you don't want to be just picking and buying and selling individual stocks and bonds. Like, how are you as an individual who, doesn't work on, you're competing against Wall Street, people who do this for a living, people that have the state-of-the-art technology to do this. You might just be like, I have a sense this company is going up, but you got to keep in mind who you're competing against here. And generally, stock pickers have been, even on Wall Street, have been significantly outperformed by index funds and mutual funds, which are just, index funds are a type of mutual fund, and it's just basically a collection of stocks and bonds. So that's a lot of what I'm invested in, is index funds of stocks, and literally own a piece of every public company in the US and internationally, and own bonds in pieces of US and international companies via index funds. And they're super easy to do, and we get passive income from that every month. We actually just reinvest that passive income so that the investments continue to grow. But we could start to turn off the reinvestment and live off some of that. Use some of that for some of our expenses.
That's great. Yeah, appreciate the insight there as to what you're doing personally. Let's see here. So it's kind of getting towards the end of the interview now, but you've been started rather Savings Academy and been going for 9 months now. Where do you see yourself in maybe another 9 months from now, and then 9 years from now?
Sure. 9 months from now, I think I will be helping more people one-on-one through coaching. I will also be doing more workshops at companies. I did one at Google a few weeks ago, and that went really well. I've done one at Facebook, and I'll start to do them at more companies here in Silicon Valley. Maybe 9 years from now, I think maybe I may add on an online course or even a technology, an app or a software to sort of be able to help more people. There's only so many people I can help through coaching and workshops, and I'm really committed to this mission of helping people spend more time on the people and things they love through personal financial success. So that's where I see being in 9 months or 9 years. But there is one other piece to it, which is I want to help more people start businesses as well. Because they create that financial runway that allows them to launch a business, because of, what the work we did together while they were a young professional.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Appreciate everything you do and your mission and your value to make an impact. I think that's something that's very unique to our millennial generation, is to not only live with purpose, but to make sure your work is making an impact on people's lives. I think that's the greatest reward that you can go to work with every day.
Mm-hmm.
2 questions I always ask every interviewee, every episode is, what are some books and resources? And then also just the best way to get a hold of you. So let's start with books and resources. Are there any that have made a positive impact on your personal life or in your business?
If you're an entrepreneur, I really like the $100 Startup, I believe it is.
Okay.
Just talks about how to build a business without putting much capital in. And I think that's incredibly important, because as we talked about, the name of this podcast, or I think you titled it really well, like a financial runway. The reason most full-time entrepreneurs, so most businesses that fail because they run out of cash, like cash flow. The entrepreneur It's like, hey, shoot, we're on, we started this thing 6 months later, we don't have any money in the bank. Like, I got to close and go get a job. Right.
Wow.
And so the $100 startup really talks about how to build a business really intelligently. So you're not putting a ton of money in early and then realize like, oh shoot, this doesn't work out. That
Yeah.
you can sort of test, iterate, and build progressively. And that's the other thing I want to throw in along with that book is a tip for people, if that's okay,
Sure.
which is if you are starting a business, I highly, highly, highly recommend, or you're thinking about it, before you go full time, building up at least 6 months of runway in the sense that like, if you're not going to have an income, having at least 6 months of, expenses that you can live on so that you're not pressured to get your business to be earning that much.
Right.
I would say really, I would recommend people only do it when they have a year of expenses, unless you're very, very confident. Either you have another spouse who's going to be earning that you can live off their salary. Maybe you've like moved in with your parents or something, so you have low expenses. Otherwise, I would recommend people have at least 1 year of expenses, because most businesses don't start making a lot of money until the 1 year mark. In fact, for me, like we wanted to make sure we had at least 2 years of runway. And I think that's actually the golden, if you can go into a business with 2 years of runway, for paying your bills, net of whatever other income is coming out, I think you're much more likely to succeed. And so pick up that book, $100 startup, and try to start saving so you have that runway, so that when things don't go exactly as you expected, you don't have to just quit and fold the business and go back and get a job.
Yeah, that's awesome. Appreciate that. I meant to ask this earlier, but where do you think maybe the main area people overspend, or where they could start cutting back to save more, to build that runway, so to speak?
That's a great question. It really varies depending on the person. And that was one of the other tips I was going to have for budgeting, is like, you really need to be able to think critically and spend in the areas that you need to, obviously, and then spend in the areas that like bring you a lot of joy and a lot of value.
Yeah.
But then cut in the areas that like, you're like, shoot, I'm spending this much on that every month. Like, I had no idea. Like, and then you really strategically cutting in those areas such that you know what you're replacing it with. A big one is dining out, especially in Silicon Valley, where you have expensive options. You have Uber Eats that everyone's using here, and I'm sure that's true where you live as well. Like, restaurants budgets in America are usually large, and with that one, the traditional advice will, well, just stop eating at restaurants. But you got to be strategic about it. Like, what are you going to eat if you're if you stop eating out? So like, I always tell clients, like, have at least 3 meals in the freezer that are relatively healthy, and that you can like warm up pretty quick, and that you like. Always have at least 3. Make sure every week you reload those, so that if you're like, shoot, I got home from work, I'm too busy to cook, instead of like going out or calling an Uber Eats, you just throw that in the thing. And the other thing is meal prep. Like, hey, at the end of the day, most of us don't have time to cook like a nice meal every day. So like, just make it in a vat. Have 1 day a week that you set aside. Make it a social thing. Maybe do it with a friend. Do it with your partner. Put on some music. Make it fun, and just cook a big vat of stuff so that you can eat. Not every day, but some of the days. And then you can eat out, of course, but be strategic about it. Make sure that first that all your bills are getting taken care of, or your savings getting taken care of, your debt. And then, enjoy the eating out, knowing that it's guilt-free, now because everything else is taken care of first.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great advice. So last question, where can people get a hold of you if they want savings advice or entrepreneurial advice?
Sure. So I would say people can go to savingsacademy.com, which is my website, or they can just reach out directly to me at Vineet, Vineet, at savingsacademy.com. Honestly, I love meeting people. I love meeting people who are interested in becoming entrepreneurs, who are entrepreneurs. So if you found anything I said today intriguing, or you want to connect about personal finance or anything else I talked about today, feel free to shoot me an email, Vineet at savingsacademy.com. Or you can also follow me on Instagram at Savings Academy. I post there pretty frequently. Those are the main ways.
Awesome. Vineet, thanks again for all you do and the value you provide to our generation, and appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you. I really do value what you're doing as well. I didn't get to say that earlier, but the idea of motivating people in our generation to have a why, operate from their why, and to really succeed, as entrepreneurs or in their career intentionally, I think that's awesome, and we're super aligned on that. So great work, and I'm a big fan of the podcast.
That wraps up today's episode. We hope to have brought you some valuable key takeaways. Most importantly, whatever you learned, take action on it. Apply it to your life, apply it to your career. Motivation and inspiration only come as a result of taking that first step. So if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe on whichever platform you found the show. You can also follow us on all the major social media platforms or contact us directly at genwhyleaders@gmail.com. That's GENWHY leaders@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Eric Huey, and thanks for listening to the Gen Y Leaders Podcast.